welcome to Up Close. My guest today, film producer Janet Young, is a pioneer in bringing Asian-themed films to the West. An Emmy and Golden Globe winner, Janet has produced such films as Empire of the Sun, The Joy Luck Club, High Crimes, and Dark Matter. Welcome to Up Close, Janet. It's a pleasure to have you.
Very nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for taking your time with us today. I know you've been really busy with a production here in China called Shanghai Calling.
That is the English name, indeed.
Okay, and it's a movie about an expat who gets sent to Shanghai to live there. And you know what was interesting when I was reading up about you is that this is a romantic comedy, which seems a little bit of a departure from your usual genre.
It is. I'm getting more romantic and more funny as
the years go
on. No, it's not that I actually avoided comedies before, but it does seem to be a departure for me, and I'm really enjoying it. The movie I did before this, of course, was the Chinese version of High School Musical, which was also a departure. And except for a couple of dark comedies, I hadn't really delved into it. And perhaps I'm just one of those people that likes to go against the grain. And I just thought, you know, I think comedy is good. And I felt it was a good way to approach cross-cultural issues.
With some levity.
Yes, with some levity. And in a way that both sides could appreciate and enjoy.
Right. Well, right when somebody expected another epic or a thriller from you, you come out with a romantic comedy. Why was this a story that you wanted told?
I wanted to tell this story because I have found how frustrating it can be that there are no films about contemporary China, and I think this contributes to a lot of misunderstanding. When I go back to the States, I'm often asked questions, even by people who are very well read and very sophisticated, that stun me sometimes because they don't seem to have an idea of what life in China today is like, at least in the big cities. And when I bring people over, I've brought a lot of directors and actors and whatnot, just, you know, friends over, and they get off the plane and they're just completely blown away. They're like, oh my God, I had no idea this is China. And I realize it's because there really aren't any images of China that reflect what's going on today in movies, you know, in media. It's very difficult to get a handle on. The images that are emblazoned in people's minds tend to be very old.
Right. I know that you're distributing this within China as well. Again, it's about expats. Do you think local Chinese are very interested in this as well?
We're hoping. It was done as a co-production, which means inevitably you have a Chinese partner that invests in the movie too, and it gets to be distributed as a Chinese movie within China, so it bypasses the whole quota system, which is something that's been in the news a lot, as you know. And we feel that there is a demographic of young Chinese that are very sophisticated. Many of them perhaps have lived abroad, studied abroad, perhaps not, but they're very up on what's going on. I was just the other day, I was listening to the radio, and they were talking about Katy Perry and Russell Brand's relationship, and just going on and on about the ins and outs of that.
I don't even know anything about that.
You really should be listening to the Chinese radio more to find out. But the level of information flow is so huge now. I think that, and most people who live in big cities have some encounters one way or another with foreigners.
Right.
And we believe that there's some curiosity about who these people are and how they live there. And there are Chinese characters as well.
Sure.
So it's something I'm thinking that a number of people can relate to.
Right. Well, you know, what I've noticed is that the humor of the West is very different from Chinese humor. Although, you know, I guess Shanghai being a very urban area, do you think because that urban environment, it creates a blend of these? I
think so. Most of the humor is very cross-cultural. We've had the opportunity to show bits and pieces of the film and shown the film to while we were making it, different cuts to sort of a narrow group of people, and the response has been very, very strong. So we'll see. You know, it's definitely more for an urban, sophisticated audience.
Right. So this is definitely one of the first co-productions in this kind of romantic comedy genre.
I guess it really is, except for some films from maybe Hong Kong or Taiwan. Romantic comedies do seem to be very popular in China, and the writer-director Daniel Shaw had a background in writing in television in the U.S., so it just felt, I read the script, and we did a lot of drafts together because I wanted to make sure it was authentic to China. I didn't want anybody to look at it and go, oh, this was these jokes were just created to poke fun at one side or another or whatever. I wanted to make sure it had a level of authenticity. So we went through quite a few drafts, but it feels like it is touching the pulse of something that's going on there as well as here. There's so much curiosity about China in the West, and there's, I think, a lot of curiosity about the West in China.
There sure is, and it seems to continue to grow, too.
Only growing, only growing.
Well, tell me a little bit about that, because I know when you first came to China, and this was back in the 80s, right?
That's when I first lived here. I was actually in China in 1972.
Wow. It was the 40th anniversary of Kissinger and Nixon's visit.
That's right.
And you were one of the first families to come after that visit. Why was your family selected?
Well, I think more families could have come, but most were very worried about coming. My mother worked at the United Nations, and there was a very charming UN ambassador at the time, Qiao Guanhua, who apparently gathered all the Chinese after Nixon and Kissinger had come back from their trip and really encouraged. He gathered them and he said, you know, he said something to the effect, my mother remembers it almost verbatim, something to the effect, we're not there's an expression in Chinese, the exact, I don't know if I can repeat it now, but we're not a two-headed monster, we're not a three-headed snake or whatever it is. You know, you don't have to be scared of us. We're your people, we're Chinese. Come back and check it out. Come visit your relatives. We'd love to have you back. And he made it seem so warm and inviting. My mother had not seen her relatives since, before the revolution. Neither had my father, and they really missed them. They did not intend to leave China for such a long period of time. Anyway, we came back, and that trip really changed my life.
Right. What do you remember from that trip?
I remember so many things. I remember you had to fly into Hong Kong and then literally take a train to the border, walk across this rickety wooden bridge to the other side. And then you were in Shenzhen, and I remember a lot of military. I remember not speaking Chinese then. And I remember...
because you were born in the U.S. You were born in New York.
I was born and raised in the U.S. And I remember meeting tons of my relatives that had come to meet us at the Guangzhou train station.
Oh, it was probably an incredible reunion.
And it was very weepy and lovely. And I remember funny things like my cousins were studying English at the time. I was like, well, I could help you with your English. And so they showed me their textbooks, and it said basically, 打到美国纸老虎, or 打到美国帝国主义, whatever, down with American paper tigers, down with American imperialism. It's like, okay, I guess I am on a certain level the enemy. But mostly I remember it was, on the one hand, the sense of warmth from my family, from extended family, so many relatives I had never met, a little bit chilly in terms of the environment, everyone was a little bit circumspect, and but it moved me. Somehow I felt like I had weirdly come home. And I almost grew up here.
So you knew from that point that this is what you wanted to do. You wanted to be some sort of cultural ambassador, so to speak, between
I wasn't sure
China
what I
and US?
wanted to do or be, but I just knew I wanted to come back. I wanted to learn Chinese, first of all. So after that trip, I decided I was going to learn Chinese. And later in college, I studied Chinese, and then I just kept thinking about, how do I get back to China?
Right.
So I eventually was able to come back after college, and I came to live here in the early 80s.
Right. You were a foreign expert then.
I was a so-called foreign expert. Actually, they had decided to create this new kind of foreigner, Chinese-born, foreigners with Chinese blood. They called us...
So ethnically Chinese.
Yes, ethnically Chinese. So it was like a foreign worker. So I didn't have to stick, because foreign experts it was a very specific brand of foreigner, and you had to live the Yoi Bingguan, the friendship hotel, and whatever, so they felt comfortable having us live in dormitories and giving us less salary. We were actually paid in renminbi. But then we had this special card that let us buy things at, say, the friendship store with renminbi, so that made me very popular.
So you're a little bit what we call nowadays a half-pat. Maybe.
A half-pat?
Yeah, have you heard that term?
I actually haven't. That's perfect.
You're not quite an expat, but you're not quite a local hire. You're a half-pat.
Right. I was a half-pat.
So you began to understand, or at least live the Chinese way very early on.
I did. I guess I did. I was living in a dormitory that had very little heat or hot running water, and I was working in a Chinese office, and I just absorbed a lot about society at the time. And it was a fascinating time. It was, the period of the Gang of Four being deposed. It was the period where they first announced I was just telling some friends last night, it was so funny. where the Chinese government announced this: we are going to have a capitalist company now, and this is our first capitalist. His name is Rui Ren, and the company is CITIC. And I think at the time people were kind of confused. Like, really? It just didn't, it was such an alien concept to sort of create capitalism from scratch. Right. But here we are. They created it and have done a better job.
And so it probably makes you such a good, with having this experience so young, young on, like it makes you probably the perfect person to be able to tell these stories to the West. When we come back, we're going to hear more from Janet Young. Stay tuned. And welcome back to Up Close. Janet, one of your first roles in film was to actually choose American films that would be brought to China. How did you gauge the appetite for American films at that time?
I think it really helped that I had lived in China, and so I knew more or less. It was an exciting time where things were just starting to open up, so there was a lot of curiosity about what was going on outside. But clearly, China having been so isolated for so long, they weren't ready for the films that were coming out at the time. Could they have seen a Back to the Future and enjoyed it, or a Star Wars, or whatever else is coming out in the 80s? We felt for a number of reasons that it was good to start with the older films, the pacing of the films. There was a little more tenderness, and, well, the first films that we chose had, number one, I think they had an interesting political bent. Like, one of the first films was Spartacus. And I think that spoke to the people because it was really about a people's revolution. I think one of the most popular films was probably Roman Holiday, because it was very light. I think a lot of the older American films, which I still have some nostalgia for, were just kind of the perfect films because they showed a gentler side of society, and I think it was easy for the Chinese to see that. We also showed that our newest film in that first group was Love Story. We decided, in fact, not to show films beyond 1970, both because of the taste of the Chinese, but also because the studios wanted to maintain the value of the newer films, with the hopes that they would, that they would increase in value over time, and that they could release them later. So Love Story was a good one too, that apparently they liked.
And love is universal.
Yes,
it's actually a theme that everyone could accept pretty easily.
Right.
And so that kind of led into your first major production role. It was for the epic Empire of the Sun,
That's
with Steven Spielberg.
Right. And I didn't actually produce. I was just a baby person on the set. I had not had experience in film, but they treated me very well. So what I was able to do was stay very close to Steven and his producer's side to guide them through getting the permissions. And so it was a strange experience for me because I had never really worked on a production before, certainly not of that scale. But I was very helpful to the production. I could be helpful.
I still remember that movie because the opening scenes where the Japanese come to occupy Shanghai, I mean, it's very powerful. And this must have been a huge production in Shanghai at that time.
It was a huge production, and what was so interesting is that that film could not have been made much earlier. I don't think China was ready to bring in a foreign crew. Also, had we waited too much longer, it would have been very difficult to recreate 1940s Shanghai because the landscape of Shanghai was changing so much. At that time, special effects had not really made their appearance in our daily lives. And so getting a crowd scene like that meant actually gathering that many bodies. We had 5,000 extras in period costume on the first day of shooting.
On the first day?
On the first day. Because
that must have been chaos.
It actually wasn't chaos. It was strangely quiet. In fact, it was so quiet when the first assistant director shouted "开始," and to get people to start, the extras to start moving. It was so quiet. People weren't sure, and he was sort of standing on the bridge with a megaphone, and people didn't see him, so they didn't know they were supposed to start moving, and so it was. But then once the message got across, no, we really mean for you to move now. It worked out so smoothly. Typically, one does shoot the most difficult scenes of a movie early on. You want to get them out of the way. This was obviously, we had prepped for 6 months on that movie for what was essentially about a 3-week shoot in Shanghai. We shot all those exteriors in Shanghai. And the whole thing really felt like an experiment. Like, are we going to be able, we really, I think, were not quite sure whether we could pull this off. But we had this really fantastic crew from the UK, and
how did they adapt? You know, like you said, there weren't many foreign crews at that time in China.
There weren't. There was one 5-star hotel in Shanghai. It was the Sheraton Huating Hotel. There was a bowling alley in the basement for entertainment. I thought people did very, very well. It was clearly a pioneering effort, and I was actually very proud of both sides. It was hard to know what was going to happen. I think the good news is that the Shanghai Film Studio had a number of experienced people working there. I've worked in different countries all over the world, and film is a sort of common language. So I think what made it easier is that the art director on the Western side could talk to the art director in Chinese, on the Chinese side, and there was a common language, even though the literal language wasn't the same. And there was a sense of, okay, we're all in this together and we kind of know what we're going for, you know? I mean, there was we had to do a lot of explaining and basically leave no stone unturned, but it was a fantastic experience. I know Stephen and Kathy and Frank, the producers, were very, very happy with the experience.
From then on, you know, you seem to focus largely on Asian-themed films.
Well,
was it that experience that moved you in that direction?
That experience was definitely one where I said, oh, I could just go to heaven and die now. But it also got me hooked on production. So I went back. After that, they had asked me to actually be a production executive working with their company, Amblin, at the time, and Universal, which was actually my official employer. I did that for a couple of years, and then I also got a little restless and itchy to go back onto a set. So I joined Oliver Stone.
Right.
And then really for that period, mostly in the 90s, I came to China a couple of times, but I hadn't actually worked here. We shot part of Joy Luck Club here, but other than that, I really spent very little time here working. It wasn't until this past decade that I started coming back.
Right. Well, let's talk about this past decade and how things have changed. You know, it's
Wow.
back in the 80s when you were filming Empire of the Sun versus, you know, just in 2010, High School Musical China.
Right. That's when it came out, 2010. It was shot in 2009.
Tell me about
Yeah. It was, well, first of all, I remember coming back for the first time in a number of years in 2001. It was actually just a couple of months after 9/11, and America was in a very depressed place. And I remember even going to the airport at LAX, and it was dead. Nobody was flying. Nobody was flying. And it felt very eerie and strange. And I left that environment and arrived in China, and everything had changed.
It was buzzing, right?
It was completely everybody seemed high. I mean, it was extremely vibrant, extremely fun. And I think it was also, you know, what is often termed the Ba Ling Ho generation had grown up. So this generation was pretty carefree, experiencing very positive forward momentum in their lives, basically, and not being weighed down by a lot of issues of the past.
Right.
And people were joking around, they were having fun. It was just a completely different environment. And I thought, wow, this is a different China. And that's, I think, when I decided, I think China's really ready. I had kind of been waiting through most of the 80s to see whether there could be a lot of activity. And then, you know, 1989 was not a great year. And so in the 90s, I was pretty tied up in Hollywood, I guess.
You did. I mean, it seems like you kind of set the stage. Yeah, in the 80s, you know, you got this experience, and then you kind of waited. You know, you were at the forefront, and then you kind of waited for the right timing.
I think I was also getting more experience. I was learning how to be a producer.
Right.
I had this great opportunity working with Oliver, and then I was partnered with a woman named Lisa Henson, and it was just you know, Hollywood was very, very active at the time, and I think I just got sort of swept up in making a lot of movies there, and I never forgot about China, that's for sure.
You always wanted to come back.
I did want to come back, but I was just constantly looking at both. Like, where could I be more effective? Where could I be more useful? Where could I do more? And it didn't seem like China was the place yet. And then when I came back in that 2001 trip, it left a very deep impression on me. And then in the mid-2000s, I came back here to shoot just for about a week of part of a movie called Dark Matter with Meryl Streep and Liu Ye. And that was it was the first time I worked with a Chinese crew in a long time, and I loved that. You know, we had a great time working here. You know, I had worked a lot in Hollywood, and the industry there is obviously very, very mature, and kind of it's getting the studios tend to be fairly controlling, and because of the star system, it's a little bit more hierarchical, and because of the unions, there's always a lot of issues with time and money always running out before you want them to, you know. And then I came to China, and it just seemed really...
And it's fresh, right?
It's really easy.
Right.
It's really easy. You're not having to
the
watch
legal matters are not as important, except for permissions.
Right. You need the permission, obviously. Right. But once you have that, then just working with the crews I remember thinking, this is really kind of easygoing and fun. I think I want to come back and do this some more.
All right. Well, this is great. When we come back, we're going to hear more about film production in China from Janet Young. Stay tuned. And welcome back to Up Close. So now you're spending much more time in China. Your last two films have been filmed here in China. You're doing exactly what you wanted to do. It seems like there are a lot more films about China coming out of Hollywood. Why do you think that is? I mean, obviously, the emphasis being placed on China these days in the news draws some of that.
China has a lot of things that Hollywood no longer has, which is a lot of cash flow. It has a huge and growing market, and just a lot of curiosity and hunger for new product. So while the theatrical box office in China is growing by leaps, it's been growing almost at 50% a year. It's almost unheard of anywhere else in the world. There are a couple of other countries that are experiencing some growth, like Russia and India and Brazil, but the United States is going. If it weren't for rising ticket prices, the number of bodies going to actual theaters is declining. The DVD market is declining. So it's been very difficult for the studios to maintain the kind of growth that they've had in the past. So naturally, they're looking outward. They're looking to see where else will our movies play. And China is the single biggest growing market. It will, it has or already will surpass, the prediction anyway is it will even surpass the American market in a number of years.
Really?
Because, yes, because the number of films, number one, again, America's declining, and China's building new theaters literally every day. So the market is very, very ripe and obviously very attractive. And I guess the good thing for me is that clearly a lot of the movement towards China is economically motivated, but because of the industry we're in, it does mean that there has to be a really concerted effort to understand, what do Chinese people like to watch?
Right.
What is their taste like? You know, what can we do? And thereby being very, very interested in learning more about Chinese culture, Chinese society, Chinese history. And so this is, I think, just from my standpoint, an absolutely good thing.
So in the future, will we see Hollywood productions being distributed only in China, like just Chinese content, or are you going to see, or is that...
Well, what was interesting, High School Musical, I think, is an example of that.
Right.
And what was particularly interesting about that was that the Chinese didn't, it was the first time that a well-known franchise was tailor-made for a Chinese audience.
Right.
They had done it for other parts of the world, South America and Russia and India, but Chinese are not used to people catering to their market. So I remember reading the blogs, and they didn't believe it. They thought it was another Shanghai situation, another, you know, pirated. They're like, oh, somebody's making a artificial version of High School Musical. It was hard for people to accept at first that Disney was actually behind the production. So yes, I think we'll be seeing a lot more productions set in China or with more Chinese content, whatnot. Now, with the recent news of the raise in quota, so there's now more American films that are allowed in.
Allowed in China,
that might be kind of undercutting a little bit the hunger to find
co-produce.
Co-produce to some degree, perhaps not. But I think overall it's just a very good thing.
Absolutely. Now, why do you feel like there's still so few Asian Americans in Hollywood? You know, you're one of the most successful. You have been called by Hollywood Reporter one of the most 50 most influential people in Hollywood. You've produced a number of critically acclaimed films, and yet there just aren't that many Asian Americans, let alone Asian American women, who are successful, especially on the production side. Why is that?
It's hard to say why that is. I mean, there's definitely more. I think when I first started out, there were very, very few. I think now there's more. I think the business has gotten harder. I think I got lucky. I came in at a time where there's a lot of growth. And I got lucky by working with Steven Spielberg, by working with Oliver Stone, by, I just kind of, and ironically, it started because of China. If I hadn't had the China background, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to work closely with Stephen on Empire of the Sun. So I think I was lucky because I was able to start at a very high level, and I've just been very blessed that way. It's difficult now for people to. I like to encourage young people to come into the business if they're passionate about it, but I worry that there's so few opportunities. So, you know, and it's still, I do see that there are a lot more Asian American independent productions, and there's a lot of talent out there. I think China, for me, China has been a great touchstone, and I never felt lesser than an American because I was Asian American. I always felt, oh, I'm so proud to be Chinese American because I have China and I have America. I think for a lot of Asian Americans, if they haven't felt that connection, there might be some confusion. Do I want to be more American? Do I want to be more Asian? And for me, it was just, I felt like I was able to pick the best from both worlds.
Right. Now, I know a lot of Asian American actors, especially, they are usually afraid of stereotypes, you know, having to portray those stereotypes in Hollywood film and also television. Do you feel like that's still something to worry about?
I think my philosophy is really to try to create and set examples. And, you know, I don't know how Shanghai Calling is going to do exactly, but I hope it's an example of a picture that on many levels does break new ground. It's set in contemporary China. It has as its lead an Asian American male who I think most people find somewhat irresistible. And so, you know, and so I feel like, and I think it's just a very fun, well-told story. So I feel that that will get people maybe to sit up and go, oh, it's possible. You present possibilities. Joy Luck Club, I think, did that. It presented possibilities. And those actresses have gone on to work a lot more.
Right, in the industry.
So that's the best we can do. I think it really starts at just the initial level of dreaming up a project and then finding the right way to execute it in a way that's appealing. And it's always a gamble. One tries to be responsible, and you try to work within a budget level that is appropriate to what you think the audience is going to be. And that's all we can do. You know, there's really no magic formula or crystal ball. I think we have to trust our own instincts. That's been my philosophy anyway.
Well, and the influence that comes out of these movies that you produce, I mean, that's media. It's a powerful thing, and those are the messages that are received by the public audience.
I think that's why I keep doing it. Sometimes, you know, you feel like you're beating your head against the wall because it's gotten more difficult in a lot of ways. But China has given me a lot of new invigoration to continue on this path, because I feel when you feel the hunger and the desire to see new things here, then you feel like, okay, there's something I can. I guess that's why I'm working here so much, because I feel like, oh, there's something I can do here that's a little bit different, a little bit more special than what I would just be doing as a sort of workaday producer in Hollywood.
Right. Well, we're very excited to see Shanghai Calling, and also the numerous, we're hoping the prolific productions that are going to come out from your production company. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in with us today. We'll see you next weekend on Up Close. Bye for now.